when I learned about your book and started reading Love Skills, then I learned about love cycles as I started to learn more about you. So then I went in and started reading Love Cycles. And one of the things that I loved was is that you go pretty deep into 5 stages of lasting love. Can you share the stages? And obviously, we probably can't go into all of them in great detail, but just share the stages and why they're so important and why we all pretty much go through them.
Well, I think that they're true. And as I say, as I go through them, I also want to say that I think people also go through these stages in new jobs. They go through these stages, we go through them when we fall in, except I think with dogs, we're always in stage one. I'm always in stage one with my dog. But I think that I remember a woman coming up to me after I gave a lecture on the stages who said, I run a law firm, and just about every new attorney goes through these stages. And I think that they're cycles of life. They're seasons, really. And my work is based on so many other people's work through the ages, including poets, but let me go through the stages. The first is the merge. In our culture, especially, the merge is when we fall madly in love and we feel like we found our other half. We feel like this person just represents the best part of us, and the ways we're different, also, we romanticize those parts. So even though we love something, so for instance, my husband is a New Zealander and an outdoors person, and he's into fitness and he's into adventure. I'm from San Francisco. I grew up with restaurants. I grew up going to plays. I grew up thinking tomatoes came from Safeway, and he grew up with a father who gardened. And so even those differences were exciting, and they were sexy, and they were juicy. And in the merge, we make everything work, everything fit. And it's mediated by hormones, chemicals, the old stories of Cupid, Cupid's mother, who was the goddess of love. She would say to Cupid, and she would say, he would have his arrows, she'd say, nail that person, and he'd shoot an arrow into the person. Aphrodite was her name. He'd shoot the arrow, and when the person was struck by Cupid's arrow, what would happen? Well, what we know now is actually it's true. When you're struck by the arrow of love, your body is filled with all kinds of chemicals and hormones. Your brain changes. So that feeling of love is euphoric. It is this sense of what I call confirmation bias, where everything proves this is just the right person. And it lasts about 3 years the first time. Every time you fall in love, it has diminishing returns. So sometimes I see people who are in their 50s that say, if I want to be in love all the time, but it lasts only about 4 months now. How come? Because each time we fall in love, it's less and less. And so it's meant not to last forever, that feeling. You have a question?
I'm shocked.
What are you shocked at?
No. This is the first that I've heard about it. I've never heard about the concept of diminishing returns.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's why people get stuck up in their high school or college lovers, that they separate and it never completed that, and they never got to do a real relationship. So what happens is the chemicals wear off, and it's sort of like that's the boat that gets us to the river and if we're smart enough, if we've had good attachment and if we have sort of wisdom, we can select a partner who can go the distance at the beginning. Sometimes we can't, because those chemicals, they really are not about relationship compatibility necessarily. They're about all kinds of other things, but that's in the book. But
and are we talking about endorphins?
Yeah, we're talking about phenylethylamine. We're talking about oxytocin, which is the cuddle chemical. We're talking about a reduction of serotonin, which creates something that's like obsessive compulsive disorder, which is certainly like being in love, isn't it? It's all you think about. And as they start to wear off, we start to realize that we are not with the perfect other half, that this person who is going to be our other half actually isn't so much like us. We move into the power struggle. I call that doubt and denial in the book, but it's really the power struggle where we think, you're not really totally like me. In fact, in some ways, we're not alike at all. So how are we going to work this out? Money, sex. The research is that if you take that all couples, I say all couples, but couples who are in sort of the normal line of trouble, that if you take them and line them up, you find that all couples have about 10 irresolvable issues, and they're the same issues. And the couples who thrive and the couples who dive have the same amount of issues. They're the same issues, but it's how they handle them that has to do with whether they thrive or dive. But the issues: money, sex, kids, animals, work, house cleaning, how all of that kind of stuff, vacation, families, blah, blah, blah. So those issues come up as power struggles. And most of us didn't learn the skills growing up, how to manage the differences. And so when we're stressed, we go into fight, freeze, flee, or fold. So we move from being totally open, vulnerable, generous, being happy with how the other person does things, to a place where we're now in the power struggle. And what that does, it creates a fight or flight response. And then we go into what I call loops, or the power struggle. And that's stage 2. And if we don't have the skills to navigate that, one of the things is that some of those wonderful warm feelings of love start to get reduced. And instead we're into reactivity and anger and our feelings are hurt. We stay in that for a certain amount of time, but we can't live. Sometimes we get stuck in those loops and we start to think the whole relationship is a loop, is a power struggle. My husband and I had an expression years ago when we were in the power struggle, which went on for a long time. And the expression was everything. And it was, everything is trouble. We can't even agree on what to eat. I suddenly want to become a vegetarian. He suddenly wants to do something completely different with our vacations. It's like everything is trouble.
And as you're mentioning everything, one of the stories that you talk about in the book that I think really hammers that point down is when you talk about the dishes.
I did the whole, and it sounds funny when people talk about it, because when we met each other, the first conversation we had was this sort of cute fight over how to do the dishes. And it was sort of fun. But over the years, it still goes on to this day. That's been 40 years now. And we still have trouble with how we do the dishes. In fact, I could actually use the rest of the time to explain why he's wrong, but I know better. And because now we just don't pay attention. The one who does the dishes does it their way. But we had some powerful, hard moves during that. And that goes into the third stage, which is really disenchantment. That's the stage. If stage 1 is enchantment, stage 3 is disenchantment. Everything is wrong. And confirmation bias, which confirms all the reasons that we're perfect for each other. In the third stage, we're not only not one, as one of my teachers, Harville Hendricks, says, stage 1 is we two are one, and stage 2 and 3 are we two are one and I'm the one. So we move from being the perfect whole to moving apart to actually sometimes turning our backs on each other in stage 3 because nothing seems to work. And everything becomes sort of evidence that this isn't working. I'm with the wrong person. People get sick of that. They get tired of living in pain. We close off our hearts. That kindness you talk about often is the last thing we can find. And at that point, we move into doing something, whatever it is. People may leave each other, or they may go into parallel lives where they just close themselves off and they say, well, we're going to stay together, but I'm not going to keep myself vulnerable to you. Or they say, let's do something different. And I love it that people come more and more to me. When I started doing my practice about 38 years ago, the people I saw were on death's door of relationship, but I see all kinds of people now who are in a good relationship. They say, we don't know how to fight very well. We don't know how to manage a power struggle. We want to keep this good. How do we do it? And that's very exciting for me as a therapist. That's where we learn skill. And that's where we learn we don't have to let go of the feeling of love, even if we're angry. But that's a very advanced skill. It takes a lot of practice to do that. But the skills are how to navigate those difficult seasons, those difficult times, and still keep connected. Because here's the thing I found. That for most normal trouble, and I say normal because there's some trouble that isn't normal. Right. It's off the chart, like people who hit each other or who take money from their retirement to gamble it away, that kind of thing, which is a different, that addictions, that needs a different kind of care. But for people who are in normal trouble, that the skill really lets us be in some of those spaces where we are not in agreement, where we're actually threatened by what the other person is saying or doing, but we know how to manage those in ways that don't harm love. And I call that the black belt of relationship, where your partner is saying something very threatening to you. And instead of closing yourself off from them, you can stay open and still stay clear about where you're at. Because here's what I found is that the most painful part of what people talk about as their trouble is really not, do we get a dog? Do we not get a dog? How do we handle sex? I have more of a libido than you do. That isn't really the trouble. The trouble is, as we talk about those things, I've lost you. Where did you go? I've lost my best friend. So instead of these people of feeling like we're each other's half, we're turned away from each other. And the skill is getting to wholehearted. And wholehearted, I love the model of wholehearted where it's you're whole. You never were not whole to begin with. And I'm whole. And where we come together, we make a third body, a third person. But it's not, my wholeness isn't dependent on you, nor is your wholeness dependent on me.
I'm just so appreciative that you have not only written the book, but that you're out there and you're talking about it and teaching this, because I think so many of us don't get past, 3 or 4, that it becomes insurmountable to us to get past that. And it's sort of that light at the end of the tunnel, to where if just by knowing that makes us, I think, want to go, okay, if I just push through this, I'm going to get to that 5th stage. And if I get to that 5th stage, we're going to be okay. Not that it means everything's going to be rosy, but at least we're going to be able to make this work.
That's right, because in the 5th stage where you're whole and you have enough of this, we're always learning the skills, but there's a way that there's much more goodwill. A couple of weeks ago, my husband and I had this argument about something, and it was about our dog, and we got really heated about it, and every time we'd start to talk about it during the day, we would melt down with each other. And at the end of the day, he said, I have this great idea. I said, what? Even though I write this, I'm not always in this state of euphoric love. I said, what? He said, what if we just hug each other and don't talk? And I said, that's really good. And we did. And we started laughing, because that's one of the things that closes down, is that physical connection. But even though we weren't in agreement about something, he wanted to take the dog on a river trip. And it was sort of, and I'm very risk averse anyway. Even though we were in disagreement and I was full of fear and he was full of feeling controlled about our dog, blah, 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 is when we were able to feel each other physically, and we could laugh at how stupid it was that we had to disconnect just because we had a different point of view. And actually, he did take the dog, and he agreed to do something that was so different for him, which was to get a life jacket.
A life
jacket. So our little Australian Labradoodle went out on a boat with a big life jacket that was probably bigger than him, but we couldn't even have gotten to that if we had stayed in lockdown.
See, I love that. I mean, you came to something that that was workable, and I think that's part of what a relationship is. Can you find something that we can both Although it's not perfect for either one of us, it is something that we can both be happy with.